Okay, we're going to talk about stocks now. Just like in a few videos ago, we talked about bonds. We showed a bond, coupons of a bond, and the face value of a bond. Here we're going to talk about stocks. Here's a General Motors. This is an old General Motors stock certificate. Looks like this was issued to James D. Hart, and it certifies that there were 5 shares that this particular individual owned, 5 shares of GM, of General Motors Corporation. So back in the day, when you bought stock, you actually received a certificate, and again, that certificate represented ownership in that company. Okay, and notice here at this stock certificate, you can see it says the word common. So there are 2 types of stock that we'll talk about. The first is common stock, or sometimes called ordinary stock, and the second is preferred stock. So common stock is the stock that you generally think of, right? If you're going to buy shares of Apple, you're generally going to buy shares of Apple's common stock. More infrequently than frequently, companies issue something called preferred stock. Now, a couple of important points of distinction here. First, preferred stock is kind of a hybrid security. That is, it's kind of in between a bond and common stock. Let me explain. So, bond, a bond, of course, bondholders, if you buy a bond, you stand in front of all shareholders in the case that the firm goes bankrupt. Now, preferred stock stands next in line to the bondholders. And the preferred stock holders basically, they don't have a claim on the assets, but dividends cannot be paid out to common shareholders until they're paid out to preferred shareholders. So preferred shareholders have preferences for dividends. I hope that makes sense here. So another point of distinction is that common shareholders get voting rights. All right. So typically speaking, one share of common stock gives you one vote. And what do the shareholders vote on? The shareholders vote on who's going to sit on the board of directors, who's going to run the company in terms of the CEO, and maybe make other important voting decisions. It is common shareholders that have the voting rights. It's the preferred shareholders that have the preferences for dividends. I think that's an important distinction. Let's look here. So I jumped back on my Fidelity account here. Here's a bunch of bonds that we were looking at in a previous video. Let me just go to a company here. I'm almost a little embarrassed to go to a company like Apple. They have performed so poorly here in the last week. So look, here on Fidelity, you can get the 52-week range. Actually, Apple was up 12% today, and part of the recovery from the coronavirus. But look, Apple's 52-week high was almost at 330. And Apple's 52-week low was almost at 170. So Apple's still in the upper portion near their 52-week high. Apple has a PE ratio. PE ratio stands for the price earnings ratio. So for every dollar of earnings per share, Apple is priced at $19.61. So this kind of gives us an idea of how high Apple's stock price is relative to earnings. This is the price earnings growth. This is the price performance over the last 52 weeks. We can go down here and look at some other things. So Apple pays a dividend of 77 cents a quarter. The announcement date of this dividend was on January 28th. It's paid quarterly here, you can see. Let's see what else we can find. Fidelity comes out with something called the equity summary score. This is bound between 0 and 10, 10 being super bullish. So it looks like the Starmine is a analyst group, and they are super bullish on Apple, meaning they think that Apple stock price is going to go up. That's probably true given that Apple stock price has plummeted here in the last few weeks due to the coronavirus. So there's a whole bunch of other important information that you would want to check out before you decided to buy. Let's look at some of this stuff. So you can look at ownership and insiders here. This is the trading behavior of insiders. So anybody that's on the board of directors, you can see whether or not they're selling or whether or not they're acquiring firms. Some are being paid with stock options and they're executing those options. And so you can see what insiders of the firm, generally the board, is doing. Look, here's the chief financial officer of Apple, Luca Maestri, is has an automatic sell order here. So there's some insider information. Again, if an insiders can trade, they just have to file with the SEC before they do. We can look at ownership here. 50% of Apple is held by institutions. You can think of that as like hedge funds, other things like that. Mutual funds hold about 11, almost 12%, right? A very small fraction of the stock is held by insiders, and the rest is held probably by retail traders, retail investors. So we can get a good glimpse of who's owning Apple stock as well. So these are some of the things that you would look at while you're looking at stocks to buy. Apple, of course, this is common stock here. I don't think Apple has any preferred stock. Preferred stock is way less common than it used to be, but hopefully this gives you a background and an introduction to understanding stocks.